Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
We begin with talks between the United Autoworkers Union and the Big Three Detroit automakers and the threat of a work stoppage that could have a wide-ranging impact on the U.S. economy. Bloomberg's Ed Corey joins us from Detroit with the latest.
Sources tell Bloomberg the union is now considering targeted strikes at a number of factories run by each of Detroit's three automakers if they can't reach contract agreements by a Thursday night deadline. The UAW and car makers are haggling over big pay raises, cost of living allowances, and other benefits the union has demanded. UAW President Shawn Fain plans to lay out the union strike plans at 10 p.m. Thursday, 2 hours before the contract officially expires. In Detroit, Ed Corey, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Ed, thanks. Well, we're also closely following activity on Capitol Hill after House Republicans launched an impeachment probe into President Joe Biden. Speaker Kevin McCarthy says the probe will investigate what he calls a culture of corruption.
I do not make this decision lightly. And regardless of your party or who you voted for, these facts should concern all Americans.
Speaker Kevin McCarthy is bypassing a floor vote in the House to move to an impeachment inquiry. Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries is critical of the move.
This is an illegitimate impeachment inquiry. Period. Full stop.
New York Congressman Hakeem Jeffries calls the inquiry a waste of time and taxpayer dollars and says House Democrats will defend President Biden.
Of course, inflation's in focus today, Karen, as the government issues the August Consumer Price Index ahead of next week's Fed meeting. Bloomberg's Michael McKee has a preview.
Investors have already priced for a rise in headline inflation, largely led by energy prices. The Fed can't affect those, so there's no anticipation the CPI will lead to a rate rise at next week's meeting. Instead, the focus will be on the core inflation rate. It's forecast to drop, suggesting the central bank is still making progress. Within the report, analysts will be looking primarily at housing prices, rents. After a long period pushing inflation up, they are expected to decelerate. Michael McKee, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Mike, thank you. We get the August CPI, 8:30 a.m. Wall Street time. Follow Bloomberg Radio and television all morning for full coverage.
All right, Nathan, thank you. Markets also reacting to the tech sector this morning, specifically Apple's long-awaited iPhone release. The company is raising the price of the new Pro Max by $100 as it looks to combat a slowdown in smartphone sales and pressure from China, which could expand its ban on iPhone use by government employees. This morning, the Chinese government claimed it's noticed some security incidents involving iPhones. Apple shares fell almost 2% after yesterday's unveiling, and checking Apple in the pre-market, it's down 0.33% this morning.
We're keeping an eye on economics overseas, Karen. The UK economy shrank at its fastest pace in 7 months ahead of next week's Bank of England decision. Bloomberg's Ewan Potts joins us from London with more. Good morning, Ewan.
Good morning, Nathan and Karen. Wet weather and striking workers. Those are two of the factors behind July's disappointing economic data. UK GDP shrank by 0.5% on the month. Combined with yesterday's data showing a rise in unemployment, today's damp GDP reading is another sign the UK economy is losing steam now in the face of those sharp increase in borrowing costs. In London, I'm Ewan Potts, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Ewan, thank you. Here in the U.S., we've been following a lot of activity in the IPO space from companies like ARM Holdings and Instacart. And this morning, we're following a European company, Birkenstock, filing for an initial public offering in the U.S. Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet has that story.
It is another sign of the allure that American equity markets hold for European firms seeking a valuation uplift. The German footwear maker plans to list its shares on the New York Stock Exchange under the symbol BIRK. Bloomberg News has previously reported that the IPO could value Birkenstock at more than $8 billion. Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase, and Morgan Stanley are leading the offering. In New York, Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
Okay, Charlie, thank you. And speaking of that ARM IPO, it's set to price after the closing bell today. Investors are watching to see how ARM's owner, SoftBank, fares in what's set to be the largest listing of the year. Investors are also waiting to see if the IPO helps to reignite equity capital markets.
Well, also this morning, Nathan, we're following two natural disasters in North Africa. Search efforts intensified after a storm ravaged Libya's eastern region, killed around 2,000 people and left many more missing. Meanwhile, in Morocco, close to 3,000 people have been killed following the nation's most powerful earthquake in a century. Last-ditch search efforts continue to look for survivors after the earthquake struck late last week.
And staying overseas, Karen, we're monitoring the meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. They held talks today at a Russian space center as Russia seeks military support for its invasion of Ukraine. Russian state media say the one-on-one talks have concluded. It marks the first summit between the heads of state in 4 years.
And this morning, Nathan, Stanford has topped Business Week's B School ranking for the 5th straight year. Every year, Bloomberg surveys students, alumni, and employers to rate the best business schools and MBA programs around the world. Rounding out the top 5 are the University of Chicago, Dartmouth, and Virginia, and a tie for 3rd. And Columbia Business School is at number 5.
All right, Karen, thanks. It is time to take a look at some of the other stories making news around the world. For that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Nathan. More on the disaster in Libya. A major storm unleashed devastating floods with thousands feared dead. 2 dams failed in the coastal city of Derna. The rushing waters gouged a path where neighborhoods once stood. More than 5,000 are feared dead, and there are concerns that as many as 10,000 could be missing. 5 former Memphis police officers are now facing federal civil rights charges in the beating death of Tyree Nichols. The new charges come 9 months after officers were recorded on video beating Nichols during a traffic stop near his Memphis home. Civil rights attorney Ben Crump, who is representing Nichols' family, says they will go to Washington to call for police reform legislation.
How many more hashtags, how many more black people have to die unnecessarily before we say that America, we need police reform?
Nichols died at a hospital 3 days after the beating. Senators will be meeting behind closed doors today with the nation's top tech leaders. Bloomberg's Nancy Lyons reports the issue will be on artificial intelligence.
The senators are hoping to learn more about the emerging technology and how to set up safeguards. Senator Mark Warner of Virginia tells Bloomberg Sound On they need to face any potential threats early in the process.
There is a real sense that what we cannot do is simply what we did with social media, which was basically to say to the tech community, you guys go figure this out, and we'll try to come in and put rules in after the fact.
This event is the first in a 9-part series of AI forums focused on promoting innovation, national security, and privacy. In Washington, Nancy Lyons, Bloomberg Radio.
COVID-19 boosters formulated to protect against newer strains of the virus will be available in the U.S. after the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention signed off on their rollout. CDC Director Mandy Cohen.
It's to protect you from the serious consequences that this virus still can have.
Shots from Moderna and Pfizer-BioNTech are expected to be available by the end of the week. A story now on sinus medications that have been on the market for decades. An FDA advisory committee found over-the-counter oral PE does not alleviate nasal congestion any more than a placebo. Doctors say taking oral PE is not harmful, but proves to be ineffective because it's processed by the body before it reaches the nasal passages. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg, Nathan.
All right, Michael, thanks. Now you can get the latest news whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. Top stories from our global team of reporters at the click of a button. Get Bloomberg News Now on the Bloomberg Business app, Bloomberg.com, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update with John Stetshauer.
Thanks, Nathan. The Aaron Rodgers season-ending Achilles injury leaves a couple of questions. Is Rodgers, already 39 years old, willing to go through what would be a strenuous rehab to get ready to play next season? And more pressing, what happens now? Jets coach Rob Saleh insists this is now Zach Wilson's team, but he hasn't looked good the last 2 seasons. They definitely need another quarterback. Will they trade for a current backup or sign a currently unemployed QB like a Carson Wentz or Joe Flacco, who's been a Jet the last 3 seasons? Jets are 1-0. Saleh's certainly not giving up.
I don't know why people are trying to put an obituary onto our team name. Aaron is an unbelievable piece to this whole thing, and we love him. But I think there's 52 other guys in the locker room, plus the 16 practice squad guys that believe that we can do a hell of a lot of good things here.
The Jets play Sunday in Dallas and Boston. Doubleheader sweep for the Yankees. Got solid pitching in both ends. Won 3-2 and 4-1. In the nightcap, Yankees used 4 relievers, all of whom were in the minors most of this season, and they threw 4 Scoreless innings, allowing only 2 hits. Yanks are back over 500. They're tied with the Sox, trying to avoid finishing last. At Citi Field, Mets beat Arizona 7-4. They had 13 hits, 3 home runs, including number 44 for Pete Alonso. Atlanta's first baseman Matt Olson hit his 51st, tying the Braves record. Mets, meanwhile, have a new boss in a move that had been long expected. They've hired 38-year-old New York native David Stearns to be president of baseball operations. It's a job he previously had in Milwaukee. Stearns grew up a Mets fan. From tennis, former world number 1 Simona Halep suspended for 4 years for PEDs. John Stashow, Bloomberg Sports.
From coast to coast, from New York to San Francisco, Boston to Washington, D.C., nationwide on SiriusXM, the Bloomberg Business app, and Bloomberg.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager. It is a fight that the White House says is threatening military readiness, but Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville of Alabama says he will continue to block hundreds of military promotions unless the Biden administration abolishes its new abortion policy and the Senate votes on it. He spoke with Joe Matthew and Anne-Marie Horton on Bloomberg's Balance of Power.
I truly believe in our national defense. If we don't have a great national defense, we don't have anything. So that being said, on the Armed Services Committee, I got a briefing about a year ago what they were going to do with the new abortion policy. We didn't need one. It worked perfect. They never had one complaint. We've had one since 1984. Joe Biden and the Democrats voted a policy in that had the 3 exceptions, and it worked perfectly, but they just decided to change it. Now, they voted it through Congress in 84. But in 2023, they want to change it with a memo from the White House. We're not a communist country. Everything that's made policy and law goes through Congress. And I told them that. If you change it, I'm going to block your admirals and generals. Well, at that time, there was 1 or 2. Now we're up to 300. I think they're starting to believe me that I meant what I said. And again, they could be clearing these nominations one at a time, 2 hours each. They don't want to do that. Democrats have not been told no since they've been up here for 2.5, almost 3 years since President Biden was elected. And now they can't handle it. But we're not going to have any movement on my side unless they change this back. And let's vote on it. Let's just vote on it. And if it passes, if it doesn't, it doesn't.
So just to be clear, Senator, you want Chuck Schumer to bring legislation ending the Pentagon's policy to the floor, or do you want to see the nominees brought to the floor? How do you see across the valley on this?
Well, if you want to get them all done at one time, all they have to do is put the policy back the way it was voted on here in the Senate by everybody's representative, signed in the White House, and then move it back. And then whatever they want to change it to, send it over and let us vote on it. If it passes, fine. If it doesn't, it's fine. But the deal is holds would be off. That's all they have to do is do the policy the right way. But they don't want to do that. They want to dictate, to us what they're going to do because, again, they think they can do it because they've ramrodded everything through for the last 3 years, and I'm not going to stand for it. The American people and the people in Alabama deserve representation. Vote on this. That's what this country is about.
Sir, have you been okay with, for the past years, decades, urogenital concerns are one of the top reasons why women who are fighting overseas have to get evacuated back to the United States, which could cost up to $10,000. A lot of that has to do with reproductive care. That's U.S. taxpayer dollars as well. Are you okay with that policy?
Like I said, we've had a policy, since 1984. There has not been one complaint from anybody about how it's been done, taken care of. There have been abortions, but now, unfortunately, it just happened after Roe Wade, and President Biden and his group said, well, we can't handle what's going back to the states, but we can handle federal employees. Now, we got a briefing on this. They couldn't give us the stipulations on this, whether, it was going to be late-term abortion, whether it was going to be the 3 exceptions. They have no clue of what this policy is. They just wanted to change it to let the American people know, hey, we can do what we want to, and I'm not going to allow them to do it.
Getting back to the issue of military families, while you're still with us here, Senator, those who are living in temporary housing and in some cases going without pay increases that their families were counting on, because that, of course, hinges on confirmation. What is your message today to our viewers, and specifically the more than 13,000 active duty service members in your state, many of them with families? Is this simply the cost of enlisting in today's military?
Yeah, we need better housing, I'll tell you that, and we work every day to try to get better housing. We passed some bills to build better housing on some of these
But they can't get into that housing without a confirmation, right?
It just depends. Now, we're talking about 300 people. We're not talking about the other 1.5 million of our military personnel that actually do the work, not the generals and admirals. They live in Taj Mahals. They have these big, fancy offices over at the Pentagon driving around in black SUVs with an entourage. I'm not talking about the corporals and lieutenants and the colonels and the majors, the people that actually do the readiness. These people here in the Pentagon, I mean, there are a lot of them running around here that they got real cushy jobs. I'm ready to maybe not get rid of some generals. We have 44 four-star generals. I want you to think about that for 1.5 million troops. In World War II, we had 12 million troops, and we had 7 four-star generals. It makes no sense. We are top-heavy here. But again, that's not the problem. And the problem here is Chuck Schumer refuses to do what's right and bring these people to the floor and confirm them. And again, we could have had this already done if they hadn't been hard-headed and say, we want our way or we're not going to do it. And so it is what it is. And again, everybody's pointing the finger at me. Chuck Schumer is at fault here. He is the guy, the leader that's supposed to be running the Senate, and he's doing a poor job of it.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed at 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, Sirius XM Channel 119, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.